I see a lot of ideas, and plus, thank you guys for the great work. I know the break was too long that you got bored, but try to do something about it next break, please. Okay, so the agenda had rsyslog first, but we decided we switch because I'm going to mention rsyslog, and it would be good that after I show you how it's used, that you can get more information in details, because I'm not going to go through too much details. So this is going to be how I use Logstash to manage my log. And often, basically, when I say my logging, is like every log that is written by any system I have. So basically, this is a real-life example of something I did and worked. So, the introduction, I'm Ramis Hanna. I'm a sysadmin, husband and a father, and I am informatique on GitHub and on Twitter. So, as I always say in every presentation, I'm not affiliated with whatever product I'm talking about. In this case, it's Logstash. I'm just a happy user. And the best message you always get from a happy user, because I really am a happy user. Logstash was developed by Jordan Sisson. He's now leading that, and he also wrote another piece of software which initially I discarded, which is called FPM. I'm a very I have a background of being involved in distros. So for us distro guys, we don't like anything but distro packaging. So first time I saw FPM, no, this is not within my let's say principles. Distro is the authority on packaging. But after I used Logstash and I got to see what he did, I just trust this guy blindly now, and I use FPM always. So kudos for Jordan for that. So a logging system is not just one place where you just keep logs. To make an architecture, there's several stages to do that, to get there. Starting from the app until the end product what you have. And there's not only one product, not end result. There's not one, there's many results. So it's like a fan. Log come from here, goes out into many courses. So first part is collection. You have the Nginx, or whatever web server you have, or whatever platform you publish your application through. You have your application itself writing, and there's so many pieces of that probably with the new microservice architecture people discussing about. You get to have more components, and they could even be written in multiple different languages, multiple different platforms. Then you end up with so many different types of logs that you have to collect. This piece writes to file, this piece doesn't write to file, but just kind of like outputs on standard out. But you can have all sorts of things. You have your system itself. You have DHCP logging things. You have DNS logging things. You have logins through SSH, VPN. All the things that you have on your system are logging. You have very, very rich environment of logs. It's a big chaos. So when you start doing the collection to put a bit of organization there, you need to put some order where you have one place where you have something, multiple places, or at least, if not one place, just maybe less amount of places where you have all the logs, so you can now start to do something. And this is how it looks, kind of like we have the front end, the back end database, admin, like all the admin stuff. And these are not just talking about the different servers you have, not even yet the different components. And when you look at each one of those servers has different components. So I looked at many solutions, and then I ended up looking at two, rsyslog, which was the default on Debian, so I used that. I wouldn't have considered rsyslog ng, but I will just keep it rsyslog for now. And there was other log shippers that were provided. So actually Logstash has its own log shipping tool, which is called, I think, Lumberjack or Logstash Forwarder now. But I chose the tool that stood the test of time. Logstash logship like this Forwarder is new. As I said, I trust Jordan to do the right thing. But when I want to ensure that all the logs are nothing is missed and nothing breaks in the middle, I would just take the tool that stood the test of time, and I would just use an syslog server, and in that case it was rsyslog. So basically I collect any logs that are not written to system. So like my Linux system writes logs, and it's using rsyslog. Good. So I don't have to worry about that. Now my Python application writes logs. Initially, the developers, when they didn't do anything except write to standard out because it was a Django, so they just found it easy for them. They didn't think about logging at all. But when I joined, we had a discussion, so they started like writing logs to file, and then I said, okay, now we need to just use the Python, whatever Python has to send logs to syslog. So I don't have to worry about what logs are written, how they are written, what the performance. Just basically outsource the headache of log collection to syslog. And I had Nginx also write into its own file, so I instructed rsyslog to monitor the Nginx logs. I couldn't find a way to make Nginx change how it logs things, so I just let it write to files, and then rsyslog is tailing the files. So there are different ways of actually getting your stuff into rsyslog. Now, what would rsyslog do for me is it will collect all the logs. So from each server I have one place where all the logs are written to file, being rotated, so not one file is too big. I keep 1 month to 3 months, depending on which system that is, of logs on that server. Well, it's not really a server, it's like an Amazon instance, but nonetheless, it's the same concept. So on that entity, I keep 1 month to 3 months, depending on what I need from it. And these are like rotated, so every 3 months the log will just start being discarded. So that keeps me safe. If anything else fails, I still have 3 months of logs that I can still recover from. Well, you should have noticed a lot earlier than 3 months. And then, after I have on each one of them all the logs in one place, in different files, one for syslog, which collects most of the stuff from the system, one for SSH access, one for VPN, one for Nginx, one for my app. So then I need to ship it all together into one place. So for this, I picked rsyslog as my shipping also, because it can send everything to remote. It caches as much RAM as it has. I limited that later on because it's too much. So even if my central syslog server is down, it will still keep the cache. Because what would happen if you don't have enough cache on rsyslog when it's like sending logs to remote rsyslog? What would happen is you start losing entries that are not sent, but they are still on file on the server itself. So if you make the cache as big as you need, I mean, if you expect 1 hour of possible downtime of the rsyslog server, let's say for maintenance, you always have to make sure you have enough cache to keep 1 hour of logs on your system, so that it caches what it's sending. Anyway, so from all the servers, all of them are sending through rsyslog over the UDP. Sorry, I use TCP protocol because UDP can get things lost. TCP helps. But I didn't have too many log servers. I only had 20. So with 20, it's fine to use TCP. If you use more than that, then things might get tricky if you use TCP, because then it can really hog your network. You might want to consider UDP, and then hopefully nothing gets lost. Or I'm sure there's some way to solve that. I don't know yet. And then on my main, or like my central rsyslog server, I keep all the logs on an EBS, which can keep roughly a year of logs from all my servers. So it's huge, but it's cheap. I don't care. I keep 1 year of logs there. And then when they get rotated, they are sent to S3. And when S3 gets, I think we had designed like every 2 years, it pushes those to Glacier, which is the even like cheaper storage from Amazon, which is just for archiving stuff. We didn't get there yet. I mean, but anyway, the plan was that. And then what happens is rsyslog sends, and then I have logstash listening to my rsyslog. So now this is where logstash starts. So I shipped all the logs, I collect all the logs on each server, I ship them all to my centralized server, and now my logstash server is listening on top of the rsyslog. So rsyslog writes everything, and I have raw logs. And then now logstash starts listening to everything that gets to rsyslog, and takes that and puts it into Redis. I'll tell you why I did this thing later on. But so it puts everything to Redis. I'm using Redis as a queuing, message queuing. So each event or each entry in log, all of them all consolidated into one place, come as like separate entries into Redis. And then there's another log stash which does the heavy lifting, all the processing, is reading from Redis and handling. So this is like the trip my logs do. They go from the app to syslog, from rsyslog to another rsyslog, from rsyslog through to Redis through a log stash, which doesn't do anything except like read, write. So it's quite fast, quite light. And then my big one starts to take over from there. Now, I collected, I transported, now I need to do something with these logs. If you look at a list of logs, just plain text like that, you'll go crazy, or you'll lose interest and you will not look at those. And as you said, if you don't read the logs, then they haven't been logged, and if it was not logged, it didn't happen, and you lose any information about what happened in your system. So now we need to make sense of those logs in order for them to become useful. So my strategy is, as you see, log everything, collect everything, transport everything, store everything, process what you need. Because if you need to process something else, that I needed to process the DHCP logs. Well, you have them stored in raw format somehow. Then you can process them later. And the only expensive part here is actually the processing, because processing is the way, at least the way I do it here, is not that cheap in resources, in performance. So let's see how I'm doing it. So, quick introduction about Logstash. Logstash, I didn't put that here. I forgot that I'm not talking about with someone who already is quite familiar. So, Logstash goes into 3 stages. You have input, so how the logs come in, and then you have filter, what to do with the logs, like processing part, and then output, what to do with the log, where to send it. So actually Logstash does not store anything on its own. Like Logstash as it is only reads, filters, or you can say process, or run some actions on the actual log, make sense of it, and then store it somewhere. So basically send it out. And it has so many input filters, so many filters in the middle, and so many output filters. So basically you can read from rsyslog, you can read from file, you can read from RabbitMQ or any other queuing, you can read from Redis, you can read from, I don't know, they have like a list of 20 different input names. So this is a quick example of what I do. So I said I push everything to Redis, I use it as my queue, and I start by, in the input part I have Redis, and Redis has like, where is the host, what data type it has. This is like standard, really standard stuff. The good thing is, when Logstash is reading rsyslog and putting it into Redis, it doesn't put text, it puts JSON. So it kind of adds a bit, it already by default adds some order to things. So you get, like this is, you have the date in a separate field, you have the actual message in a field, and some fields that can be parsed easily from the rsyslog format. And then I start the filtering. So what things I do in filtering? I give here 2 examples. So I look if program, and program is one of those keys in every event. So every event is a document, a JSON document with keys and values. So program is a key, and if I find the name DHCP in the program or DH client, then I know that this is DHCP, and I don't need it now. I had taken the decision that I want to drop this from my processing part, so I'm dropping it completely, not even storing it later. But if I have Ansible in the program, then I need to add the tag Ansible so I can do other things with tags later. So basically, you look at each entry, you look for keys that you are interested in, and you start making actions based on that. Now, this doesn't tell you much, this doesn't really do anything processing, really. Now, this is where the heavy lifting starts to happen. Maybe not readable well, but again, I'll try to explain. I'll push that file somewhere. But anyway, so I start looking at anything that is access log. And we have this very nice grok filter. Well, basically, it's a glorified awk script. Anybody familiar with awk? Okay. not enough. Anyway, it's a parsing. It parses the entry. So basically, I say grok and I match, and like this match dictionary I put here basically parses the line of Nginx and creates a key value pairs of the whole line. So I have message. So I take the message, so the actual log that Nginx puts, and I then split that and parse it into an IP or host. So the first part of the Nginx logs or any web server log is always the IP, and then what user, if there was user authentication, and then user auth, HTTP date, what date did Nginx put on that request, was it get or put, the verb, and then what was the request, and then I expect to have HTTP / some number, so I need to know what HTTP version was that request in, the response code, how much bytes were sent, what is the, if there's a referrer, I want to know the referrer, if there's an agent, I want to have the agent, what was the log time, so how much time did the request take, log time is the actual, the time that the log happened, request duration, how much it took to create the request, and then if there was SSL, the SSL client, because some of our clients use, some of the requests come with SSL, client SSL verification, so it also brings, if there's a client SSL, it shows me that, so I know who is the user, because this is how I use it. So instead of having one chunk of text that tells me everything and I have to read it myself, then this makes it now something that I can easily search or index or find out information from easily. I can also use the JOIP filter or plugin, which basically takes the client IP, runs it through the JOIP database, and then also outputs for each one of them. So I see the whole response and I see where it comes from. So I can easily map it on a map and see where all my clients are coming from, or my users are coming from. For example, for VPN, I also use grok, which tells me which IP was accessing the VPN and which user. And I can see now also again because of the IP and the JOIP mod plugin I have, I can see on a nice map later on in the end of the cycle who logged in from where, and that can easily be, for example, checked against. Okay, I know all my users who use the VPN are in Finland. If anybody logs in from Belgium or from the US, there's a flag. And I have to, and of course somebody might be traveling, but you are aware of that, so you can always make the exceptions. But that's a way to raise flags about security, for example. Same for the access. So you know your client DN and the IP should always be coming from this place in the world. You can always check against that. So this is actually grok is the most used, at least in my opinion, is the most used tool or plugin for Logstash, because it actually gives you all the power of parsing. It parses and it generates key value pairs which you can easily handle later on with some programmatically handle. So now I've done all the processing. So let's say I only decided to only look at Ansible and at Nginx logs and the VPN log. So that's enough for me now. Everything else is stored on file. And whatever that comes in and does it, so whatever comes in the input and has no rules in the filter, it just goes into the output directly. So basically, what happens is this. A message comes in, there's a filter, and it passes. I'm sure this is not a filter, but anyway. Let's deal with the filter. So you can either drop, or you can parse, like with grok, or you can just let it go. So both of them, like at the end, go to output. So the only ones that I don't get into the next phase are the ones that are actually actively dropped. Okay. So now I want to store these logs because okay, nice. Logstash doesn't store. Logstash parses and puts them somewhere. So best place to put your logs in is Elasticsearch. No matter what tool you use for logging, Elasticsearch is good. I don't know, but I use it. And Jordan didn't write it, so I don't really recommend it. I just say it's good. I tested it.
It actually works for Elasticsearch now, so it might be a bit biased.
Yeah. Well, I started with Elasticsearch, it was a bit early, and I had some problems with processing, and also again with Logstash was really slow at the beginning, but now they have really progressed everything. Yeah, please.
Yeah, actually, I got a question about Elasticsearch. Do you use your own instances, or you use service for the SaaS somewhere? Or
No, I don't use any SaaS. This was for Holvi, banking service. We should not put anything sensitive anywhere except our own. We had a policy against services.
What are the limitations actually for Elasticsearch? So how much data they can handle?
They can handle, I mean, you can push as much as you want. The problem is the search gets slower over time, of course. So my approach was keep in Elasticsearch 6 months of logs. Depends how many, I mean, my 6 months of logs that were processed were not that big. So I could easily say 6 months is good for me. Maybe if you have too much logs, maybe you don't need 6 months. And again, it depends. How much logs do you need instant access to? Because I'm not discarding logs. Logs are in syslog. They are on the server. They are on my central syslog. There's no need to store all of them in like a place where they are instantly available. So 6 months for us in our case was good enough. So we pushed into Elasticsearch, and we did not use the embedded, because you can use embedded, which is part of the Logstash bundle you get, but I didn't. I chose that because it makes it easier to scale. But again, it just pushes to Elasticsearch. And Elasticsearch is just a database. You do not get to see anything in it, but it stores them and indexes them. And this is the default, not the default, but this is like the recommended backend for Logstash. And then Logstash is filled with so much information, so much like really, I mean, first you can make sense of, but you cannot see it. Well, you can write your own get parameters, or you can use Kibana. Kibana, just a bit of history. Kibana was a separate project, did not do anything with Logstash, but it actually evolved to become the Logstash tool that everybody uses. It can also be used with Elasticsearch independently. Logstash was not part of the Elasticsearch ecosystem. It just used it. And today, actually, Elasticsearch is a kind of company they own, or like they kind of got Jordan and the guy who wrote Kibana, and they are all like one bundle that they actively market and try to sell. So the three tools, when I started using them, they were like completely separate, and people were recommending use this, use that. But apparently, I made the right choice because they kind of like bundled them together now. Anyway, so in Kibana, you can see I tried to prepare some actually live demo, but I couldn't. So sorry for that. But you can see here, this is like the default view. You see events, time events happening with that are you can only see here like timestamp, severity, and message, which is just a simple. But you get all the this is just filter view, but you get all the other keys here, and then you can select what to see and what not to see. And here, this is the default graph they put, number of log entries over time, and it actually reflects what you have searched here. So we can actually like up here search for all the incoming gets from a certain IP, and you get a list of them over time. Which then you can also add another widget here for a map, which shows you those IPs over the map. Or you can see pie charts, you can see all sorts of different nice graphics. I had one for the VPN with a map which showed me every login in VPN coming from which country. Some of the limitations I found, which are not really limitations, it's maybe out of the scope. But when I had an event for logging in a VPN, I had also an event for logging out, and I could not show here, like, cancel the login when the person has logged out. So at least I can see if he logged out or no. I had to do that like on my own. But I think it's a bit out of the scope. There's no tool that's really nice, at least for OpenVPN, that shows you like keeps track of users this way, unfortunately. But that's not all. This is just one thing you can do. You output things into Elasticsearch and you can see them there. And this is really good if you, okay, yesterday we had we think we might have had a problem with the latest deployment. Customers are saying it's slower. You can start mapping here the response times. And you see how many customers were in. And I mean, depending on the query, it's a very rich query language here. I cannot say I know it much, but I used some features of it and it was quite strong. You can see, okay, you can see easily that we've had slowness really yesterday during this time. Or you can see we've had a surge in users coming in. There's other tools that can help you see that stuff, but it's good to have something in-house that you can rely on as well. When in the company they were using Google Analytics to see like users and whatever, it took them, I think, a month to figure out what is actually showing the graphs. Because for me, Google Analytics is just voodoo. They just get something, they show me something, and there's no way I can trace that. How can I be sure even that this information is correct? There's no way. As a sysadmin, I suspect things. I don't just take them for granted. So I couldn't. So I had to draw things on my own. And actually this showed that it's at least it's a lot faster to interact with because I can control everything there. Now, I have collected, transported, processed somehow, and stored that in a database. And I can see it. Good. Let's take some more actions. Simplest thing you can think of, stats_d. So whenever I get anything in the whenever I get an access log entry with a request that says to the page login, send that to stats_d, so I can see how many logins I get over time. So because it tells me how active our users are using my system. I send also every response I have, I send to stats_d. So I can see over time how many 200s, how many 404s, how many 500s. So it can show me how well my app is doing somehow. These are quite crude statistics, but as I said, as we've been also talking, there's a gap between developers and admins and business, and the only way to bridge that is through discussions. So our discussion was not perfect, so we came up with some half-assed solution. But I'm sure unfortunately I left this company, so I didn't continue on that. But I'm sure we were getting somewhere with creating the right statistics. So this was the stats_d. So this is done. Like the presentation slides are done. There's 2 points I want to just mention before I finish because I'm almost done with my time. I used Redis in the middle. So rsyslog, logstash, push to Redis, and then another logstash reading from Redis. Why? As this was in the early stages of designing and architecture, and every time I would stop logstash, modify the configuration, modify the configuration, restart logstash. When I started, that would take 5 minutes. Today, it takes less than 20 seconds. But during those 20 seconds, you lose processed events. And the only way to overcome that is you find the time it stopped and the time it resumed, and you can take those crude and just send them to logstash again manually, which is easily doable, but then you have to figure out which time exactly, because if you rely on these metrics, you don't want duplicate entries, because then they pollute your metrics. So I figured that if I push everything to a queue, which is just filling up, and then when I restart, then it will just pick up where it stopped. So that was one good way, especially in the beginning when I was restarting a lot, and and logstash was not performing well. One thing bad about logstash, it's a jar file. Sorry. Even worse, it's written in Ruby, but shit happens. Really. I wouldn't have used it if I knew that in the beginning. I couldn't find any better one. There was Greylog. Didn't really like it at all. It was kind of monolithic and couldn't get all the pieces together like that. Although it was quite good at the filtering as well. Lately there was FluentD, which kind of popped up in the scene. People are quite hyped about because it's like standardized on JSON format. Really doesn't really mean much to me. it's again Ruby, so it doesn't matter. The good thing about Logstash is that when it like, puts everything in a jar, it's Ruby, but it's like JRuby, so they ship it all together, and you don't have to worry about Ruby. So that's a good thing. I'm a sysadmin. I like distros. I think distro packaging should be the best way to go. So I asked Jordan, why are you doing that? Why not just package it in the right way and depend on the dependencies coming from the distro? And he said, if you use Ruby, you would know why. Then I started reading about it, and then I found out why. So I'm glad he used a jar. Initially, as I said, it was really memory hog, so it could really be slow if you don't have enough memory. And we used really small instances, like a small instance from Amazon. But today it's not much more performant. Tell you a joke. It's a silly joke, so if you don't laugh, I'm not going to be offended. I got hired by a company to. My title is a DevOps engineer. And in the interview, I said, "Do you guys know what DevOps is?" And they said yes, and they started describing what I understand about DevOps. So how come I'm a DevOps engineer? That's not a title. That's more of a culture or a way of working. And they said, yes, we know we'll keep it this way for now because we have a separate team. Okay. 2 months later, they dissolve the DevOps team, becomes an Ops team as part of the bigger scrum of developers. So I think they're on the right way. So if somebody hires anybody for DevOps, please be careful when you say that. It's not something funny. I'm done. So any questions before I? Bye.
Yeah, so you talked about using Arsuslog and then you talked about the problems with the cache and restarting stuff and so on. So Lumberjack uses a state file to keep track on where it's indexing in the file system.
Which one?
Lumberjack.
Lumberjack. Okay, the forwarder. Yes.
Yeah. So I didn't really get why didn't you just use that? What did you gain by using Arsuslog?
The problem was I was shipping everything directly to Logstash. Okay.
Yeah.
Lumberjack was already early. I mean, Lumberjack is really early stuff. It's just I don't know how many. When I did that, Lumberjack was in like just one commit or like a few commits there. I couldn't trust that. As I said, I picked the tool that has stood the test of time because this is where I really rely on for integrity of my logs. Logstash is just processing. I love Jordan and I trust him, but I wouldn't trust him with this piece.
Yeah, but
until time has
proven it. What about now? So if you would do this now, would you consider using it, or do you see something wrong with it?
I don't see anything wrong with it. I haven't tried myself collecting all logs from the system.
Yeah.
Because the protocol that because rsyslog is not just reading files from the system. While forwarder would tail a file. I wouldn't trust stealing a file that much. I'm not a developer, so I'm not sure how that happens really. So my opinion here is just like really my opinion. But rsyslog uses a protocol, and it's quite well known. And when it has buffers and all, cache. So if my application is writing to a file, the file can become a bottleneck. But if my application is writing to syslog kind of abstracts that problem. So if I mean, you have rsyslog anyway installed. Why install another piece of software, which is again packaged as a jar file?
Yeah.
Don't run 2 jar files.
Yeah. For me or for us, it was basically that Lumberjack offered the state of the file system, so we didn't have to use Redis. Another good thing about Lumberjack is that it supports encryption out of the box and authentication.
Mm-hmm.
So we can ship logs over the public internet without worrying
rsyslog does that as well.
Privacy or whatever.
I mean, in our VPC, we have everything running over HTTPS. So the communication between front end and back end, which were in the same VPC and same network and everything, but over then so everything we sent over the line had to be encrypted. But rsyslog just supported it. And I think Antti can say more about rsyslog later on. Other questions?
Has anyone here used Logstash and this one? Here's the comments.
I've done both of them. The plugin in quite extensive way. So this looks great and it is free, which Splunk definitely isn't. But once you get to the questions like how you do the access control for logs, if that's required. If it's not, it's it's not a problem, but if somebody requires that these guys need to see only these logs and those guys need to see that part, and there's somebody who needs to see all of it, it will become, well, it's the problem with the Elasticsearch actually, but
Yes.
it will become a problem of this elk stack in the end, and it's not very easy to solve in a flexible way. And
I can think of solutions, but they are not so nice. I wouldn't even show you.
And you said it has a nice search language. Maybe I just didn't get it.
It's nice, but it's not easy.
My brain was polluted by Splunk already by then, but I still would prefer Splunk search language to Elasticsearch in any day. So this is like any open source. You can make it work for you, but it takes quite a bit of work if you want something that isn't quite obvious.
Yeah, and if you have the money for Splunk,
Yeah.
I don't think everybody has that.
Another good thing about Splunk is that it promises that nobody can tamper the data that's in it. So if you work for the government and you have to guarantee them that nobody can tamper the data, Splunk can offer that and promise that it doesn't get tampered.
You can. I mean, the promise is because they have a quite tightly integrated system and they offer you a black box, kind of. We passed.
That's what you get when you pay.
Exactly. So I can make the same promises about my system.
Yeah, but you can edit the data in Elasticsearch, but in Splunk, you can't edit the data in Splunk's database or whatever.
If I don't trust you, I shouldn't worry about anything else.
Yeah.
But of course you can, but it's going to be much more difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you don't trust whoever is.
And if you make some logging and make it cryptographical, like safe, it makes this much harder.
Yeah.
That you sign everything in every point and take that next as matches to next time. Can be done. I don't recommend it without good reason.
Well, I'm not saying that Logstash is better than Splunk. I'm saying it's much better. So don't get me wrong.
I actually agree with you on that. So a good thing about Logstash is the Kibana. It's far superior to the dashboards in Splunk. So in terms of viewing quickly if your application is working fine, or viewing quickly your response times or anything like that, I actually feel that Kibana is far superior.
Yeah, and the documentation in Logstash is really good. They've done good work with keeping that up, updated. There's one also, to be fair, there's one downside to, they have a quick cycle of development. So when you start with, they have those plugins that can go away or can change behavior, so you have to be careful when you upgrade. But I think that's a side effect of fast development of software. So I mean, nothing changes on you while it's working. You have to actually upgrade to get things broken. So you always have to pay a bit more extra time and to inspect what has changed. But other than that, I've been quite happy with it. I've deployed it everywhere I've worked since then. Well, it's another place. Okay, thank you for listening, and enjoy the next one.
So we are a bit late on schedule, but it was a good presentation. I will showcase RSUS lockdown. Of course, the previous presentation relied on this being present, and I would actually like to ask you, how many of you have used RSUS log? Okay, how many of you have set up a system where RSUS log sends stuff to other machines? Okay, that's like...
How many have you set up any systems? Linux stuff?
Okay, so those people probably won't get a lot out of this presentation, but for others, there's some peek on what this thing does, which actually lies underneath probably almost every Linux distribution nowadays. I think some use syslog I don't know why.
Yeah.
This is really standard stuff, and I have to apologize, I'm not in any way an expert on this. I tried to get our sysadmin to do this presentation, but he was unfortunately unavailable for today, and I just tried to pick his brain as much as I could about this. So fire away if you have any questions, but I can promise that I can actually answer. I'll be honest and I'll tell you we can't answer. But let's see. So what do we use it for? We ship server logs from server to server, and almost all of the logging in our systems go through our logs. Exceptions are exceptions, so if we actually have to raise some exception somewhere or highlight something, we might use like direct SMS messages, or we send a lot of email actually from our system if something is wrong. But the basic stuff and all the performance stuff and access logs and user following, all of that goes through our log. So a short note on what kind of infrastructure we are running. We are a small company and we are running a small system, but it's still distributed in a couple of cities and a couple of data centers, because we kind of want to provide our service even if our service provider isn't up to. It's probably since we use Hessner, so that might, for some people, explain why we want redundancy on our hardware. It's really, really cheap, but it also comes with this idea that you can, for example, trust the network. So we have only 8 hardware nodes. They are distributed in different data centers. Some are clustered so that they perform well, but basically we try to run everything on multiple cities so that we can recover from catastrophes quite easily. 70 virtual machines all running on top of Zen, on top of those 8 hardware nodes, and we do some of that. For example, for testing, we spin up a new cluster of virtual machines that they do the testing, and then we shut them down and relieve the hardware for other stuff. We are pretty cheap, we are a startup, so we have to do this kind of stuff. And what we try to aim for is that the logs, when we store them, they are shipped to 2 cities. So if an earthquake hits, we still have all our logs. So when using RSS log, this is my log inspection UI. It says grep and a huge hash and API.log. This is how I do performance inspection. I find I actually also grep on the part that says how many seconds or some seconds queries took, and try to make those greps so that I can see if something took more than a second or more than 100 milliseconds. I could use those tools, but for now I'm actually pretty happy with this. Maybe it's just my grep skills. But anyway, this is what RSS log by default gives you. It gives you log files. It might give you them in a different machine, but this is what it does. It's RSS log that usually does your Linux system's local logs. When you see that you have a syslog, it's gone through RSS log. Probably.
And this API log is a web server log or an application log?
It's a web server log, yes. So it's the web front end for our API. It's pretty Unixy. It has its man page and it comes with every system. In a good way, Unixy, so you can do stuff like this. This logger diamond, or it's actually not a diamond, it's just an executable. And it uses the C API and writes to the syslogger system, and you can pipe stuff into it. This is our sysadmin's little script that he uses to wrap a executable that just prints to standard out or standard error and pipes that through logger to syslogger. And it can be shipped like any other. So if your system prints to standard out, you can use our syslogger this way to ship the data forward. Well, you have to know this stuff, but for that, I've heard it knows a lot of things. And if you know this stuff, it's easy, but if you don't know, for example, how log rotate works, then you just get a huge one file that contains all of your logs for an eternity. So rsyslog doesn't do any of this log splitting. It's actually a separate program or a separate instance that does the log splitting. And what it does is that you just say reload to rsyslog when you have cycled logs. So this is very Unixy way of doing things. It involves these ugly configuration files, but your system is probably handle yourself with this. So what we do, so this is the way you configure it, like or interface with the systems. This is how you integrate your own software with rsyslog. So I find it pretty easy. It's just plugging stuff. And what we do in our system is that so we have this Zen containers. All of the Zen containers themselves, they are their own rsyslog. Then the DOM0, which is hosting the Zen containers, they run also an rsyslog which is exposed to the DOM-use. They use the UDP protocol just to send the data to DOM0, and then the DOM0 is responsible for sending those logs forward. And what they do, they use the rsyslog again to ship it forward, so they act like as log relays, the page machine. So when they are shipped to log 1 and log 2, which are our generally named logging machines, they use rsyslog over TCP. So basically, those two machines are also virtual machines somewhere that can be contacted with a TCP connection. This is how our configuration looks like on the emitter. So basically it just says, well, send them to the rsyslog on the DOM0. This is what the relay says. So DOM0 relays them. There's a couple of more stuff that you have to type in. This is actually a really weird configuration. I didn't even try to wrap my head around this. You can kind of read what it says when you know that it does what it does. But if you are trying to configure it for yourself, you really have to do some Google to get it working like this. But what this says, it has 2 port bindings that go to log 1 and log 2, and it ships the logs there.
Just a comment. In the line that says ship to log, it's like this asterisk with asterisk at IP port. This is where it ships. So using this asterisk, this means send everything, but you can always specify what to send where using this part. Because rsyslog has this log facility which can be used here. So I think it's like the format here is facility dot severity, which you can pick. Okay, like send everything coming from the Apache facility with severity like error or info or debug, and send it to this, and you can always do that. But I haven't seen that being used. But it's also
Yeah, there's actually these relays will also drop some information which they don't think are relevant, but I didn't include that. Yeah. And then the storage nodes, they just tell that they are listening to this TCP port. So far this is really easy. Then is the configuration of where to put those logs when they arrive. Here are these, there's this program name is equal API. So if we go back to this logger, we gave the program name with a /t, which is /tab. And then we can use that later on to filter those to different files. But it just looks at the message, reads what's in it, and you can write these weird looking syntaxes to put them in different files. And what we actually do, even though we have many machines doing the same thing, we just log everything. For example, all of our API machines log into one file. They just have their host name in there, so I can easily grab that. I don't know, some people would probably want to split them machine by machine. We haven't found any use for that. You can do that post processing.
But do you have information in each line about which machine was it?
But
Do you have information in the log about which machine was it?
yeah. We have unique host names and we just write those.
In the log?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, this is what I have for rsyslog. If you have any questions, just shoot. No questions. Okay, cool. We are on schedule.